But we were actually shut down much of the year this last year, and I had very few students to work the first probably half of 2020, and so we really suffered with respects to weeds and maintenance of plants in the conservatory. But we're actually now we're almost fully staffed with students, and we've got a couple of ACE students that are working on succulents quite a bit. So we've been doing a lot of transplanting and propagation, and so you know, in the future when you guys get to visit, those of you that have been to the conservatory before will see some of the improvements that we've made, including the development of a garden outdoors called the Biological Orchard and Gardens, BOG for short, but there's no bog there. And we have a big area with South African plants, lots of aloes blooming at the moment, and that is open to the public because it's outdoors. So if any of you guys want to visit that part of our collections, you're welcome to. The UC Davis Arboretum is open all the time, and it's an amazing garden, Mediterranean plants from throughout the world. They actually they also have a South African section, but it's more towards the perennials and etc. But anyways, we have a lot of plant stuff to see on campus. So if any of you guys visit, the campus is open. The outdoor stuff is open for the public, but indoor stuff, a lot of it's closed down until further notice. Yeah. So shall I go ahead and get started with my presentation? Okay, and I do have the chat feature up. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that. I am happy to entertain questions as we go along. I do reserve the right to delay some answers if they don't sort of fit with the topic at hand, or you know, I can answer them later in the presentation. But I like an interactive presentation, and I know it's a little bit less so online, but I'll try to sort of think about what people might be asking as I go along, okay? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And I think y'all can see that right there. Yeah, all right. So yeah, I'm gonna be talking about soil fertilization and acidification of succulents, okay? You know, as I go along, again, I'll just, you know, anyways, I'm going to sort of talk, I'm going to talk mostly about roots and how to make roots happy and what's happening in the underground part of the plant, okay? And so if I see some questions that don't pertain to this particular part of this the subject, I'll sort of revisit them at the end of the presentation. Anyways, we at the UC Davis Botanical Conservatory, we have something like over 5,000 species of plants, a fair number of succulents. We're known in the succulent world for having a pretty diverse collection. You can see some of them there at the bottom of the screen, potted up in clay pots. Anyways, we have a pretty good collection of them. We're known for a few succulents in particular. And so if you guys ever get a chance to visit, indoor or outdoor, we have a lot of stuff to see. Okay. But anyways, so I want to do a quick overview of how a plant works. Succulents are basically just swollen, less branchy versions of a normal plant, okay? They're just adapted to low water conditions, high temperatures, etc. And so there are some modifications to them, but they do these overall things, you know, soak up sunlight, do photosynthesis, that requires carbon dioxide going into the plant. The plant bleeds out, it gets rid of oxygen. Oxygen is a waste product, okay? And then also, I'm not talking about in this talk, but I've done it in other talks, talk about how the plant is modified to prevent heat uptake and release heat, spines, etc. Okay, but the top of the plant is generating sugars, glucose through photosynthesis, and then the roots, they don't do photosynthesis because they're buried underground. They do something called respiration, which is what we do, which is we take oxygen in, use it to burn to you know, take the energy out of sugars and use that to do stuff in our body, move our muscles, breathe, all that kind of stuff. And so roots require oxygen, all right? And then succulents that are adapted to low water environments and typically sandy, less nutrient-rich soils need lots of oxygen because they're adapted to those conditions, okay? And so, it's really important to make roots happy. And this is kind of what the gist of what I'm talking about today is how to make roots happy for your plants, okay? And the quick answer is give them more oxygen, all right? Acidification is an important one that I'm going to talk about more later, but also giving them the right temperatures. By the way, as an aside, some of the, you guys know that a number of succulents are called CAM plants, crassulaceous acid metabolism. That means they only open up their little breathing pores, their stomata at night. And, I've wondered over the years why some of our plants suffered growing in the greenhouse. And it's because greenhouses indoors stay warmer longer into the night. And some CAM plants need cool temperatures to get triggered to open up their breathing pores, their stomata. And that's why they do bad in greenhouses. One of the multiple reasons probably why they don't do as well in greenhouses. So interesting thing there. Okay. All right. So what do roots need? Okay. What do roots need? They need temperatures below about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Roots are typically in the soil buried, and only near the surface do you get pretty high temperatures in soil. But once you go down an inch or two, the soil is actually pretty cool. And so roots aren't really adapted to high temperatures. So they can be happy and do what they do, which is grab water, grab nutrients, and stay alive. They need cool temperatures, and that's why keeping roots insulated or not exposed to warm temperatures. Like if you're doing windowsill growing, you have pots on a windowsill, keeping the sun off of there so it doesn't beat on the pot and heat up the soil. Okay, pretty important. Okay, oxygen. I already mentioned that. Oxygen is incredibly important. People don't kill their plants by overwatering them. They kill them by keeping them away from oxygen, okay? Roots can handle more water if they have lots of oxygen. And that's why a succulent mix that's very well drained is critically important, okay? Roots need water, all right? Even desert plants, if you take up succulent and you grow it in a pot for long enough and you let it go bone dry, you can actually kill it from underwatering, okay? I've seen that happen with pachypodiums and other very succulent plants that have a semi-dormant period. Well, if you keep them really bone dry under less than ideal conditions, they can actually die from lack of water, okay? The roots die and then an infection moves in and eats up the plant, okay? Roots need nutrients. They need to grab the nutrients for themselves and for the rest of the plant. And so I'm going to talk about how pH is important as part of some of these other things like oxygen and temperature, okay? And this is a big, long paragraph. You don't have to read it all, okay? But the gist of it is that plants like acid soil much more than alkaline or basic conditions. They like a pH below 7 because it makes it easier for them to grab nutrients. And I'm going to talk about that at the end of my presentation, okay? So yeah, anyways, acidic conditions is really important, and I'm going to talk about several ways you can do that and some examples of people that have done that, okay? So, in case you don't survive my whole presentation, all right, it takes about 1 teaspoon to 2 tablespoons of vinegar per gallon of water to acidify your water, okay? If you have really clean water that's really pure, doesn't have a lot of minerals in it, probably 1 teaspoon per gallon is enough to get the pH to about 6 to 6.5, all right? If you're like in the San Diego area where they have mineral-rich water because it comes from the Colorado River, it's got a lot of minerals in it, or somewhere with a lot of well water, it might take something like 2 tablespoons of vinegar. And this is just regular white, cheap vinegar, okay? It's just a weak acid that acidifies the water, makes the water acidic so that the pH is just right. We're going to talk about later, it's really important to actually measure it, not just eyeball guess it, okay? It's always better to experiment and measure rather than, take the shotgun approach, okay? All right, really quickly, I want to go through this chart to show you how you basically are torturing plants in containers. And so you want to be good to plants in containers because of the challenges to them, okay? So water, and by the way, succulents don't quite work this way because they don't wilt in 1 to 3 days, okay? But the soil goes to dry and the roots suffering in just a few days in a container, whereas it takes a little bit longer, 1 to 3 weeks in the soil, okay? I water my plants in the ground. I water them once a week or less, all right? Unless they're like really water hungry plants, I might water them like every 4 days or something like that, okay? Aeration, low to high in a day in a container. You water it, soil saturated, there's not much oxygen in there, then gravity pulls the water out, plant pulls some of the water out, and you have air pockets. It takes about a day. It's usually adequate to high in the ground unless you're in clay soil, all right? And for succulents, it's really important, good drainage, so that they're not in clay soils where the roots can easily rot if things are getting overwatered, okay? Nutrients drain out, get washed away pretty quickly in a container, a week or less, whereas they're fairly constant. It takes a whole season for them to get used up in the ground because the ground sort of grabs it. Unless you're in really sandy soils, then nutrients wash right on through. But why do nutrients disappear so quickly in a container? Because with a few waterings, they get washed away, okay? And, succulents don't stay moist all the time. And sort of requires a certain amount of moisture to grab nutrients out of the soil. And that's why it's really important for succulents, if you want them to grow well for you, is to fertilize them every time you water, maybe about a quarter strength, okay? It's a good, that's what we do with ours. Every once in a while, I flush them through with purified water just to get a little salt buildup out of them. But at home, about, quarter strength every time is gonna do really good for you, okay? And I mentioned pH. I'm going to talk more about that later when I talk about acidification, but pH can drastically change in a container pretty quickly, whereas it's fairly constant in the ground, okay? And it's actually connected to the next one, salinity, low to high in weeks or a month, whereas it takes a whole season in the ground for salinity to build up. Why, the pH, why does it change so drastically? Well, salts affect the pH, and a pH unit of 1 is a 10-fold difference. So, 10 times more alkaline if it goes up, from 1 to 2, or let's say from 7 to 8, it's 10-fold difference. But 7 to 9 is 100-fold difference. So each unit is 10 times more than the previous one. So pH from 7 to 9 is quite drastic in how different it is. All right, and I'll talk more about that later. Temperature, you can have a 40 to 50 degree change in a container, if sun's beating on a pot and then it cools down at night or whatever, whereas it's pretty darn constant in the ground, like I said earlier, okay? I think once you go down a foot or two in the soil, you're talking like, mid 50s for the soil temperature, something like that. Maybe a little bit warmer, 65 or something like that, like a root cellar, okay? But, again, near the surface or exposed to the sun, roots can get quite hot, all right? And, disease susceptibility of a plant in a container versus a plant in the ground, much more susceptible in a container, all right? Now, do you see that you're basically torturing plants in containers, okay? Plants in containers are getting tortured. It really is a challenging situation. And so that's why you want to do things that make roots happier, okay? By, keeping them from overheating, giving them the right pH and the right kind of watering and lots of oxygen, okay? So let's see, I'm gonna just check a couple questions. Someone had a question about leaves on escherias, and I'll answer that a little bit later. Information about, I mentioned in presentations about succulents. Well, I think this talk is going to be available here online. And okay, I think I'm gonna have to revisit some of these questions a little bit later, okay? Oh, someone said, I read that watering with rainwater is best for succulents. Is that true? If so, would I still have to add vinegar? When rainwater is captured, it is actually about a pH of about 5.5, I believe, 5 to 5.5. But as it sits there over time, even rainwater will sort of get more towards the mid range of 6.5 to 7. a pH, but it's perfectly good to water your plants with that. It's you know, typically very pure and a little bit on the acid side. So yeah. Okay. All right. So this is the mix, the mix that we used to use at the Botanical Conservatory. And actually I really liked it when it was made with pumice. We had some problems with accessibility of pumice to us for a while. We actually used to get it out of San Jose, TNT Trucking, or I think they changed their name. But they were not very reliable in the quality of the materials that they made for us. And so we started using a local vendor that had red lava in our soil mix. And we used that for about the last 4 or 5 years. And plants honestly did not do as well as with the pumice. And so we redid our mix and go back for a second here. So our mix was about 66% inorganic material, okay? You know, uniform, pumice, and then uniform coarse sand, a little bit of peat moss, and some redwood compost, and then some things to adjust pH in there. And so, you know, we really loved it when it was with pumice. Because one, commercial mixes have way too much organic matter. Okay, even when you buy a succulent mix that you buy at the store, it'll be really good for succulents, like for the first few months. Okay, and then it's kept warm and watered, you know, here and there. But the warm temperatures and moisture will break down the organic matter, and it will get finer and finer, which means more water, less oxygen. And it works perfectly well for the nursery industry for the few months that it takes for a plant to get potted and sold to you, versus when you're growing plants at home. Do you transplant your plants twice a year or once a year? No, we don't even do that at the conservatory. And so by having a soil with mostly inorganic material, your succulents are much happier for much longer, and they don't need transplanting as often, okay? By the way, that mix, the commercial mixes are called the Cornell mix because they were developed at Cornell, a place where it only is warm for about 3 months out of the year, okay? Our mix is called the UC mix, and it's really made for longer growing in containers, all right? This is the components of our mix as it used to be. The 12 mesh sand is pretty important. There's the summary of the materials, but I want to show you our mix now. This is our mix now that we use, and it's you know, this is yards, but it could be parts. And so basically it's about 87% inorganic material. All right, it's even more inorganic than it used to be with pumice, a little bit of red lava in there because red lava does have some good nutrients in it, but too much of it could be bad for plants. Decomposed granite instead of sand. What's nice is that decomposed granite, it's a little bit more coarse and jagged edged, and so it's not like sand that packs in more tightly, okay? And then we use the coconut peat plus some 3 pounds of per yard of dolomite for pH stabilization, okay? So by the way, a little note here, pumice holds about 15 to 20% more moisture than red lava or scoria, okay? And so that's one thing, that it actually holds a little bit more moisture. So maybe that's why we're having problems with our plants. But also, red lava may have some toxicity effects under certain conditions, okay? And you know, when pH drops down below, aluminum, manganese, or possibly fluoride can probably be toxic to the plant. So some growers have noted, Steve Southwell, some of you guys might remember him. He used to use a lot of red lava, and he told me that when it was warm and hot and dry, his succulents really suffered when he was using red lava. And it may have had to do something with some toxicity effects, if not at least the fact that it holds less moisture and roots were much, much drier in pure lava versus pure pumice. Okay, pumice is more porous, has deeper pores, holds more moisture. Red lava is less porous than pumice and more on the surface. So yeah. Anyways, that's why we were happy to be back to pumice. Okay. This is a view from the top of our mix, and you can see it's really high in on pumice, a little bit of red lava, and you see some of that the coconut peat in there. Okay, so that's a witchia plant growing in there. They love drainage, they love moisture. I have to water them in the greenhouse about 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how sunny and warm it is. But they love the really good drainage. Okay. All right, so I mentioned that already. Let's go. Okay, yeah, so what you can do at home, you know, we get our soil mix made by the cubic yards at American Soil Products in Richmond, okay? It's most people at home don't have that capacity. So the simple thing to do for you is to buy a commercial potting mix that's a quote unquote succulent mix and add some what's called dry stall, or if you can get a hold of like good pumice, that's even better. And dry stall is pumice. And there it is, a bag of it. We used it a little bit last year, and it actually had a little bit too many fines for our conditions. So if you ever get some of this, what I recommend is take it and sieve it out to shake out, to get the fines out of there, or wash it out to get the really fine stuff, and then mix that in with your potting mix, and you'll have a nice coarse mix. Because if you cut it with 50% pumice, your mix, all of a sudden you have a much lower organic, much better draining mix that lasts a lot longer. Okay. So yeah, I'd really recommend doing that. I mean, some growers are growing stuff in pure pumice these days, and plants are very happy. Okay. So this is called dry stall. It's pumice. Don't use stall dry, which is an absorbent that probably has some diatomaceous earth in it, and it's a very spongy material that you shouldn't use. So make sure it's dry stall. A lot of feed stores have it, or if you can get a hold of, or you know, a soil yard has pumice, you can go there, and oftentimes they'll sell it to you by the bucket if you're nice to them. Okay. If you ask if it's okay, as opposed to saying, this is what I want. Anyways, by the way, we actually have been buying pumice from a vendor in Southern California. I'm getting this next week. I'm getting 4 pallets of 50 bags per pallet of 1/8 and 3/16 pumice. And it cost me like $14 a bag at that volume. But you can probably buy, you know, you can buy it from them, but it'll be much more expensive in small amounts. But this stuff is really great. And next time I give a talk in person, I might be offering to bring some to sell, some of this bag pumice, because it's really good stuff. Sifted, so no fines. We've been using it in our mix. 1/8 inch stuff is great for seedling germination of succulents. Anyways, really, I love this stuff from General Pumice Products. It's great pumice. Very happy to have that. I want to show you the magic of growing in pure pumice, okay? All right, I maybe said pumice too much, but pumice is really, for succulents, it's a miracle thing that we can get on the West Coast that you can't get some of this in other parts of the country, okay? But this is an African succulent tray that we planted in 08, July of 08, there at UC Davis in a planter. This is 2 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and I think about 10 inches deep at the front and about 12 inches deep at the back. So it's sloped a little bit. You might be able to see that there. That was in 08, and these were the trays in 01, okay, or in 11, you know, 3 years later. Look how much those succulents grew. I mean, this plant right here that I'm hovering over, that's a, oh my gosh, Euphorbia buplerifolia, I think it is. Is that right?
Yeah.
No, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And there's the same plant 3 years earlier. Okay, you can just see how much it grew. Okay, and then you can see these gasterias. Like there's a here's a gasteria right here, and there's that same gasteria, you know, 3 years later. So things, you know, pure pumice. Okay, we were fertilizing them. We were adding fertilizer. There was a time when I was adding like every single watering I was doing fertilizing, and they grew too quickly. So I had to cut back on the amount of fertilizing, because basically when you grow plants in a volume of soil like this, it's like they're growing in the ground because they have much more root room available. They have more, they can put their roots near the surface where it's drier, or send a few roots down deeper where there's more moisture. And it's more like the plants in the background that you see in my background here of my desktop. Okay, and there's the planters in 2016, 8 years later. So just go back for a second, look at that. Isn't that amazing how much they grew in that time? All right, in pure pumice. All right, and that's because of the extra volume of soil and lots of oxygen for those roots. So the plants that wanted more water can send their roots a little bit deeper, where there's the good combination for them of water and oxygen. And the plants that like it drier can keep their roots near the surface, where it's a little bit drier. So yeah, and there's the planters just last year. So this is like 15 years, 12, 13 years later. Okay. Yeah, in 2021. I'll sort of stop for a second here, and any questions out there? Okay, someone said, I get my pumice from Payless Hardware in San Jose. Hey, that's great if it's available in your area. Okay. Yeah, General Pumice Products is where I get the pumice. Okay. We use two sizes. We use the 1/8 inch, which is really great if especially for smaller plants, younger plants that like a little bit more moisture, and seedlings. Again, the 1/8 inch stuff is really fantastic. And then we use the 3/16 stuff to mix into our general soil mixes. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna check review back here. Oh yeah, so yeah, in your area, in you guys area, Central California, pumice is much more readily available than as you go farther north. And in Southern California, people have lots of sources of it. Okay. Yeah. Someone said, I read the coconut peat doesn't break down. Is this true, or does it just break down more slowly? Peat moss and coconut peat are pretty broken down already. So yeah, that last they take a long time to break down. That's the benefit of coconut peat and regular peat moss. Is that it's really mostly broken down, pretty well composted. So that type of organic matter is going to last in your soil mix much more than a general organic matter that you mix into that's going to break down further. So that's the benefit of using the coconut peat. And apparently, my understanding is that the coconut peat actually it absorbs water when it's dry much better than standard peat moss. So benefits there. Okay.
Where do you get the coconut peat?
Most places have it now. Most nurseries have it available. Sometimes it'll be in pretty small blocks, but it's becoming much more available. I can't say exactly where to get it, but most garden supply centers, I believe, carry it these days. I know Ready Grow, which I believe they have multiple locations throughout California. They sell it by like the bales, by the 50-pound bales. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about containers as we go along here. Okay, so this is Flora Grip Gardens in San Francisco. Some of you guys may have been there. It's pretty good eclectic collection of plants and displays of those plants. Here in this case, that car has become a immobile container. All right. But what makes a container for a plant? Well, pretty much anything. Okay. This is for, a wheelbarrow here being used as a container, for the mobile gardener. This is for the tired or retired gardener. Maybe you're thinking, tread lightly with those jokes, Ernesto. Haha. Okay. Anyways, this is probably for the potty mouth gardener. Okay. Hey, question for y'all. Which of these makes the crappiest container of all? Yes, the one whose drain is up at the top, right? Toilets, I don't know if you know how toilets work. Water gets dumped in there and it goes in, it comes out the backside and then gets pulled through, gravity pulls it through, and that sucks everything out of there. And so that is really the worst container to use. Okay. At the very least, it should have a drain hole, and maybe if you take a toilet and you drill a few holes in the bottom with a good bit, you can make it a better container. But in this case, you can see that these looks like marigolds or whatever they are are actually molding in there because it was so, so moist. So don't do that. You need to have drainage, okay? And if you grow plants in a tray, I'll talk about that a little bit later. What you can do to in where you have them sitting in a tray. We'll talk about that in a bit here, okay? So, but what makes a good container? Well, ideally, under ideal situations, a container is taller than it is wide. Okay, it narrows at the base to decrease the bottom of the container, the volume in the bottom of the container, which creates what's called a saturated zone. If you have a soil that holds a decent amount of moisture, I'll talk about that more as I go. And it's filled with the right. Sorry, excuse me. It's filled with the right mix for the plant. Okay. And again, succulents, you want to err on the side of lots of good drainage and less organic matter versus maybe a plant that likes more moisture and doesn't need as much drainage, with more organic matter. But succulents, lots of oxygen, good drainage is really important. Have I said that enough? I haven't yet said it enough because it's very important, okay? Okay, so look at this. These containers are not ideally shaped, okay? They're ideal for presentation and plant shows, but you just have to adjust for the situation. And I don't know if you guys heard of Plants for the Southwest, Gene Josephs and his wife in Tucson, Arizona. But he showed me that he put me onto this trick a number of years ago. I was asking him, how does he deal with watering these plants in these containers? And he says, I have a moisture meter, okay? And see this little poppy right here? He would let this poppy be a bit of a weed in his greenhouses. And when he saw that the poppy was wilting and really lacking water, like when it was just like sagging, he knew that the soil was bone dry. And he knew it was time to water even something like this pharaoh cactus here that, it doesn't wilt, it doesn't shrink that quickly. But if the soil goes bone dry, the roots might die. In fact, there was a conversation I had with Gene there. He was having trouble with Pachypodium brevicali and a few other pachypodiums that in the middle of winter, when they had this like pseudo dormant period, he would not water them at all because that was the conventional wisdom of what you're supposed to do. Well, what happened when he did that is, he said he was having plants just randomly die on him. So he said, what the heck? I decided that I was going to splash a little bit of water on them during the dormant season because they were dying on me. So I had to try something. And then, as I was having this conversation with him, I was like, probably what happened is that the soil was going bone dry and you have nice fleshy roots in the soil. And so it goes so dry, the roots start dying, like happens in the wild. And the rot gets, some fungus is around with that moisture that's inside of the plant and gets in there and then finishes off the plant. And you guys have had succulents that up and died on you in one day, right? Because fungi move through them really quickly. Well, by giving them a little bit of moisture, you keep that soil from going bone dry and you keep major roots from dying in the plant, and the plant doesn't die as easily, it lives longer. And so, even for, something like this pharaoh cactus here, keeping the soil from going absolutely bone dry is gonna help the plant not die from extreme drought. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, but it was kind of an eye-opening thing for me and for him in doing that. And kind of we figured it out together. And I've been doing that for our succulents, and I have a lot less of them up and dying on me at random times throughout the year because of this. Okay, and the point is here that he uses this little poppy as a moisture meter. I have a Pereschia and a few other plants in my succulent in the succulent areas that I watch and see how when they're sort of wilting, and then I know it's time to water plants. Okay, so find an indicator plant. You can take this and stick it in the soil and feel for moisture, but especially when you have succulent mixes that has a lot of pumice in it, it's hard to get it very deep in the soil. And sure, you can buy a moisture meter, but it doesn't work very well for very well-drained soils. Okay. Any questions or comments out there?
Yeah, I've heard two stories about watering from the top or watering from the bottom. Which is the best?
For succulents, it's actually really important to water from the top and let it drain through. if you have mineral rich water, one of the worst things you could do is water from the bottom and let those minerals keep building up in the media. Okay, plants are used to, the tops of the plants are used to getting water on them. There's no like, you shouldn't water the tops of them. You shouldn't water the tops of them on a cool evening when it's foggy or something like that, where you're just gonna like, anyway, you shouldn't water them at night when the water is going to sit there and maybe promote some fungal bacterial activity on the top of the plant. Um, but in the morning on top, I do that with all my succulents, and I don't, I like to wash dust off of them in the summertime. So I really, watering from the bottom is like something that somebody came up with to be really clean and tidy, but it's not, I don't think it's good for the plants, especially if you have mineral rich water. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, the Tyler said, I visited plants for the Southwest last spring, and those little Schultzias were everywhere. Yeah, the little desert poppy. Some people, I know Sam Williams in Sacramento, a good succulent grower, he would use a grass that was a weed in his greenhouses. I dare say you could even use Oxalis canaliculata if you really wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it. Okay. But some kind of semi plant that you maintain as a weed, as a moisture meter, a really good one, something that doesn't die easily. That's why I like the Perescias. Okay, so let's move on here. The coarser the mix, like let's say this would be pumice on the left over here. Over here on the far right would be a really dense potting mix, maybe even soil that you put in a container or something like that. Okay, so basically, the finer the mix, the finer the particles in there, the smaller the little pores in there, the more what's called a saturated zone that you're going to get. All right. And what that is imagine soil being a sponge, okay? And when you water that sponge, when you wet that sponge, gravity pulls the water out of there, but then how good the sponge is at holding moisture is what generates the saturated zone. And so if you have a finer mix of smaller pores, that wet area is going to be much, much bigger where there's no oxygen in there when it's completely saturated, okay? And that's really bad for succulents. All right. By the way, putting junk in the bottom of the pot does not increase drainage. So if I have a regular potting mix and then I put gravel or even pumice or something coarser over something finer, that sponge is still going to hold on to the water, and it's not going to increase drainage and drain out. Okay, that's not how physics works. That's not how the combination of the sponginess of the soil and gravity work. All right, so if you put stuff in the bottom, all it's going to do is going to get more oxygen into the bottom, but it's not going to increase drainage. All right, I hope that makes sense. So and if you look at the one on the far right, I mean, the more you fill up coarse material over fine material, you're just elevating that. Like if you have a sponge in your hand, by moving it up and down, unless you like wring it, water's not going to come out of there. Okay, and that's what happens when you put junk in the bottom of the pot. It's like you're just holding a sponge in your hand. Okay, so what can you do? Well, that's why you have tapered pots that narrow to decrease the volume in the bottom that's saturated. But you can also do is maybe you put something to mound it up so that the soil still connects up to the bottom of the container, but you have less volume in the bottom of the pot. That's why good pots actually have like are not flat across the bottom. They are kind of up and down or whatever. Like a lot of good succulent pots or orchid pots have like a little dome in there, so that the water gets channeled to the edges at the bottom. I hope I'm making sense. I know it's hard to explain. I need to get some good visuals for this, but don't put stuff in the bottom of the pot evenly for drainage. If you do it like a bowl or like a little mound, but you want the soil the potting media to connect all the way to the bottom of the container, and that's how you will get better drainage and less of that wet sponge in the bottom of your mix. Okay, I hope that makes sense. You can even put it at an angle. Okay, all it is you're decreasing the volume of at the bottom of the sponge. If you take a sponge like this and you tilt it sideways, more water will drain out than if you have it holding flat. Try that at home. Okay, even like take a wet paper towel and soak it up and hold it into like a tube. And if you hold it flat, it'll hold a lot more water. But if you tilt it on the side, gravity will pull more water out. Okay, I think that's the best I can do to explain that one. Any questions or comments out there? Okay, if I was doing this in person, I would have you all repeat after me. I will not put stuff in the bottom of the pot to increase drainage. Or if I do, I will put it at an angle or a, etc. Okay, I hope I beat that one to a pulp there. Okay, the height of the container does not affect the saturated zone because it's all those 3 containers are filled with the same mix. Gravity and porosity will dictate how thick that saturated zone is. Now, the pot on the right will be drier, held less moisture up here than this one, because at the same level, these all have the same moisture, but this gravity does pull the water from the top of the plant. So if you grow something in a deep, tall pot with pure pumice, it's going to be pretty dry pretty quickly at the top because gravity will pull the water through. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, so one of the things, with respects to keeping roots happy is when to transplant. And it's really important to transplant your plants when they're beginning or an active growth. Okay, so if I'm doing like winter growing South African bulbs, I mess with them in the fall or in the middle of winter, not as they're going dormant. Okay. And for most of our succulents that we grow, most of them probably grow in the summertime more than they do in the winter because of temperatures. And so really most of them succulents, I mess with them in like late spring into early summer, okay? More leafy plants that grow normally in containers, I start doing them in the early spring into summer throughout the year. It's really important. I'm going to go to the number 5 here. You want any of your plants that you're messing with, that you're transplanting, stop about a month or so before you know that they're not going to be doing much at all. They're not going to be actively growing, okay? So you'd never mess with plants as they're going into dormancy because then they won't recover from the wounds that you create. And you could be all careful as much as you want about transplanting, okay, but you will cause some amount of root damage unless you're super careful. And if you have those wounds that don't heal because the plant isn't actively growing, then that's a problem, all right? So that's why you want to do about a month before you mess them. Someone said winter growers. Again, I do them just before they start growing in the fall or as they're growing, through about half of their growing season. All right. And if they're tougher plants, like it's a jade plant, do whatever you want. It'll be fine. But plants that are, I do want to qualify with that. But if, plants that are sort of more like boom, 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 they do this, they do that, you want to make sure you're messing with them during their growing season or just as they're coming into their growing season. Okay. All right. So, they talk about California native plants or Mediterranean climate plants. Plant them in the fall because they do grow during the winter time and they get established and they're ready for the drought the next year. Okay. And so if I'm messing with Dudleyas, I would do Dudleyas in the fall and winter because they're winter growers. All right. Okay. Really, lastly, before I get to the pH stuff, I want to mention transplanting. Just a detail about transplanting. It's really important not to transplant something, a succulent, especially a succulent, into too big of a container, okay? So here, I'm going through the steps and I'm showing you transplanting. I'll go back to this in a second here. And I've seen this done before, okay? A small succulent into a large container. Well, what's gonna happen in there? Especially if you have lots of organic matter, too much soil for the plant to remove before the soil starts breaking down, and fungi and bacteria are going to have a party at your expense. Okay, I like to use this example. Maybe you're that person, or someone, or like me when I was in college, I had a housemate that left a wet sponge in the sink. What happens to a wet sponge? It starts getting moldy and smelly, anaerobic, and that means you've got bacterial and fungal activity, okay? And when that happens with a succulent, that little bacterium or fungi are going to have a party at your expense. It's called eat the succulent, okay? And so you don't want to, that's why you don't want to put something in too big of a container. And that's why you should use do a situation where when you have the roots of a plant dangling out, you have no more than an inch on the edges, okay? If that, and this is for regular potting mix, you can get away with more if you have more pure pumice, which has no organic matter and much more oxygen in there. So you just have less fungal activity happening. So you can have a bigger volume, but in general, no more than an inch on the edges of the pots with the roots dangling, so you don't, your succulent doesn't suffer from too much moisture. Okay. Questions or comments? Oops. Okay, let's see. Someone said, what would you recommend if the damage is already done and the roots were already damaged during their dormancy? A good question. So if that happened, something like that happened, sulfur is a really good one, or you might go ahead and apply a fungicide to the wounds, and then let the plant air dry, so that the wounds are really dry and those cells are all dead on the surface, so you don't get fungus moving in. That's why it's really important when you do, like, let's say, make cuttings of succulents, is letting them air dry so that the wounds heal before you put them in some kind of mix like pumice or gravel or whatever, so that they root. You want to let them air dry, so that the wound looks leathery. That's when you know that it's okay to bury back in media. So yeah, if the damage is done in the wrong time of the year, you want to probably pull the plant out and let it air dry, have the roots dry out and heal, so you don't get infection happening. Okay, temperature and containers. I mentioned the importance of keeping roots happy. Well, look at this. Clay and wood containers insulate soil and roots from heat much better than plastic pots, okay? Or high-fired ceramic pots that we're all using for our succulent shows are fired so high that all the air pockets have been like melted out of there. It's really solid material, and heat actually moves through that pretty quickly, okay? And for a plastic pot with the sun beating on it in the summertime, in about half an hour, the temperature can go up to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit in the soil. Do roots like that? Do any humans like that? Do many living things like that? No, some things tolerate it, but most things hate it, okay? Don't do that to your roots, okay? Keep the sun off of them. Sometimes what I do, we actually have been growing a lot more of our succulents in plastic pots now. And then what I do is I take the plastic pots and I drop them inside of a clay pot for insulation, okay? So unless, we used to grow a lot more for succulents in clay pots, but our soil mix is so good that we don't need the extra breathability of a clay pot. But I like the insulative nature of a clay pot. So I like to take plastic pots and slip them inside of clay pots, okay? Fabric pots for succulents, well, they would work. They're breathable. They're like a clay pot, but they're fabric. Just keep the sun off of them, and it should work. There's no major magic to them, so they could be used. Yeah. Okay. You just have to keep the sun off of them. They'll insulate a little bit better, but yeah. Okay. So how to prevent salt buildup when you have plants in trays? Well, one of the best things to do is to have your plant elevated in that tray. So it's not sitting in the very bottom of that. You have some kind of gravel or something to elevate it so that when water drains through, that mineral rich water that most plants are getting, especially if there's fertilizer, drains through, settles in the bottom of there, but never gets connected back up into the soil so that it can get absorbed into the plant. Okay, so having them elevated in that tray. Okay. Yeah, elevate plants to prevent wastewater from absorbing back into the container. Okay. All right. Myself, I have a lot of plants. I have plants actually sitting directly in the bottom of trays or planters at home, but I use mostly purified water and then only fertilize them every once in a while for my indoor house plants, and some of them are succulents. And so I have very small amount of nutrients that I'm adding, very small amounts of salt. So if you have more pure water you can water from underneath. Like our carnivorous plants that we grow, we have them sitting in trays. We fill up the tray and the plant absorbs it, but it's pure water. So only when you have really pure water should you be watering from underneath, okay? Or can you water from underneath, okay? Okay, let's finish this off talking about pH and the importance of it, okay? So I don't know if any of you guys have seen this chart before, but when I saw this chart, it sort of opened up my eyes to why pH is so important, okay? And by the way, it took me a lot of searching on the internet to find this chart. So if anybody wants to take a picture of it, this talk is actually available online as well. I'll tell you where the link is at the end of my talk. It's a really good chart that shows you the availability of nutrients based on pH, okay? And you can see that sort of 6.5 to 7 is the magic, 6.5 to 7.5 is the magic range where most nutrients are readily available. Look at iron. Iron really drops off when it gets alkaline, and that's why you have things like citrus that suffer with alkaline conditions and other plants, okay? Most plants actually suffer under alkaline conditions. They don't like it, some tolerate it, okay? But all plants pretty much prefer more on the acid side, and I'll show you why that is in a second, okay? So and you know how it works, all right? I'm telling you that it's important because of that availability chart, but I'm going to show you why pH is important, okay? So someone said, what causes the bimodal nutrient availability of boron and phosphorus? Oh, you know, I'm not sure about boron, but phosphorus is actually plants. Well, let me get to that. I'll talk about that in a second here. So soil and organic matter are negatively charged, okay? So it's literally a negative world out there, okay? Like clay soil is very negative, and what happens is that it's negative out there. Well, the nutrients, like nitrate, are negatively charged, and actually phosphorus is negatively charged. And because it's negative and soil particles are negative and organic matter is negative, it washes right through, okay? And plants actually have a pretty cool way of absorbing those nutrients where they actually do a lot of work to pull those nutrients in, okay? Ammonia is actually a much more readily available, easily absorbable form of nitrogen for plants, okay? So ammonia fertilizers, you get more bang for your buck because nitrates wash through the soil. And phosphorus, you only can absorb, it's only negative, so it takes a lot of work for the plant to get it. And so overfeeding of phosphorus and nitrogen is just a waste because the one that whatever doesn't get used just gets washed right through, okay? But look at this, potassium is positively charged. Sulfur, I think, is bound away. I'm not exactly sure what form it is when it's absorbed. But calcium positively charged, magnesium, iron, all the other ones are positively charged. And those positively charged nutrients, like ammonium, also bind to the soil, okay? And they actually literally are like positives and negatives attract, and they get stuck to them. And how do you release them? Through chemistry, okay? So plants, what they do is they acidify the soil. They add acids, which is basically protons, positively, you just say positively charged things. So they literally plants literally make the world a more positive place, okay? Or chemically, they make the world a more positive place, maybe not literally. Okay, they pump those out. They pump the acids out into the soil. And what that does is that loosens those things that are positively charged as well, so that the plant could then absorb them. So they do an exchange. They put positively charged stuff out there, and then that makes it easier for them to absorb it, okay? And so if the water is basic or alkaline, same thing, that means it's much more negative. The water is much more negatively charged than positively charged. And so you have negatively charged water, alkaline water, and then, you know, media that's negative, and it's very negative. And so those nutrients just stick onto there, and it takes a lot more work for the plant to get them, all right? And if you air it on the side of acid where the water is acidic, then you're making it so those nutrients get loosened up and are more readily absorbed by the plant. Okay, and that's basically how it works. The plants create what's called an electrochemical gradient that's beneficial to them to absorb the nutrients. Okay, it's just like the way electricity works. You know, it moves in a direction. But basically they're just creating a situation where they build up the positivity to release the nutrients that they want and absorb them. And they actually have these other cool ways that they get phosphorus and again nitrate, where it's a more involved, more energy expensive technique to get them, but they do get those nutrients. It just takes a lot more work, and that's where a healthy plant, healthy roots, makes it easier for them to grab those phosphorus and potassium. Sorry, phosphorus and nitrogen. 130. Nitrate. Question out there? Okay. Any questions about this via chat or in voice? Happy to entertain them. Okay. And what I'll say is that, again, if you go from pH 6.5 to 7.5, that's a 10 times difference in how positive the situation is. And then if you go to pH 8.5, which most water in municipalities is, because cities make water alkaline because it degrades pipes less, then that's 100-fold difference. And so that's 100 times harder for the plant to get those nutrients out of the soil than when the pH is 6.5. Okay. And so, all across the country, even when places have really good water, municipalities, to prevent things like what happened in Flint, Michigan, with the pipes leaching out all sorts of chemicals because the water became acidic, they actually make the water alkaline to decrease the corrosion of the pipes, and that's not good for our plants. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So how can you acidify? Let's talk about a few different ways to do it. All right. Again, you want to get the pH to about 5.5 to 6.5. If you have more mineral rich water, it's actually helpful to get it a little bit more towards the 5.5 range so that it balances out what the salts do, okay, chemically. All right. So again, about 1 teaspoon per gallon of water for low, oops, let me go back for a second here. For water that's pretty good, like what we get now in the Davis Woodland area, because we use surface water from the river, Sacramento River. But in the summertime, when we have more well water, it would take a little bit more to do it. Okay. Citric acid is also a really good one to use. Very easy because it's a weak acid, so it's hard to overdo it. But one of the best things you could do is to get a pH meter to make sure you get the water to the right pH, okay? And in small volumes, doing it like this with vinegar, very easy. I mean, a teaspoon, you have a gallon, it's gonna last you a long, long time, okay? You can buy the pH test kits, the papers, which are really sometimes hard to use to get the pH just right. You can get pH meters on Amazon nowadays for like $26 or something like that. So, highly recommend having a pH meter to check it throughout the year if your water changes. Okay. So my friend Barry Rice, who grows a lot of succulents now, he's actually a carnivorous plant guru. People know him in the carnivorous world. He started growing a lot of succulents, and he said that when he started acidifying, he noticed like a marked difference. And everybody that's done acidification says that within days of doing it, you start seeing growth on plants that didn't grow, okay? Because the roots are happy and they're doing their jobs well, okay? So he used this classic paper in the succulent world that was written by Elton Roberts and a guy, Malcolm Burley, they went out and measured rainwater and did all these measurements, and they came up with this idea that you should have your water be at pH 5.5 because that's what rainwater is. Okay, I'm gonna say is that the practical thing of what they recommended was great, but some of us that understand the science a little bit behind it, we're a little bit more like dubious of like, what led to their anyways, the science is not super clear, but the practicality of what they did was right on. Okay. And they're basically saying acidify the water so the plants get more nutrients, okay? Oh, and Barry posted it to his website right there, this paper that they wrote. So, you know, he's a scientist. He's, you know, oh, by the way, this is some of his mix he uses, but he uses Dynagrow is what they recommended in their paper. You get, and 50 parts per million is like perfect for watering your succulents every single time. It's about quarter strength of what nurseries use, okay, or what's recommended on nutrient. When you buy fertilizer, it's aimed for like 200 parts per million. So quarter strength, you get up to about 50 parts per million of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Okay, so these are all the things that he did. You know, I can go into detail more if you wanted, but he's getting the pH with the fertilizer to about 5 to 5.5, so that when it hits the soil, that's a little more. The soil is, you know, especially when you got more pumice in it, more minerals. It can be a little bit on the alkaline side, so that sort of balances the pH. Okay, and you always want to like put your nutrients in first, and then add your acidifying agent to get the pH to the right level. Okay, and you know, he's a scientist. He's got all sorts of cool little, you know, equipments. You know, graduated cylinder there, beakers, and a pH, a really high quality pH meter to get it like. He's like, I'm going for 5.5 because that's what these guys recommended. Okay. So he's like very technical, okay? But you can do it with one of those little pH devices, and as long as you get it more acidic, you're way better off than leaving it how it is, okay? All right. Go back for a second here. Yeah, so look at this. When he used to use like up to 300 milliliters of, oops, excuse me, up to 300 milliliters of 5% vinegar, or sorry, 7% vinegar. Where'd it go? I lost my space here. Yes, here we are. So he used to use about 300 milliliters of 5% vinegar to get the pH right. Now with surface water that we get because of a big project that they did in our area to get river water, he only uses 50 milliliters to get the pH to the right level. Okay, because it's less mineral rich water. All right. So yeah, water. You know, some municipalities the pH can get up to 9, and that's from 6.5. That's a lot. You know, over 100 times different. Right. So he was saying that when he did this, when he started acidifying, all of a sudden his Ariocarpus, his Astrophytums, they just were all much happier. And you know, I can tell you that everybody that's done this says they had plants that like barely grew for them at all, and then once they adjusted the pH, they like within the days they started noticing growth on their plants. Because the pH is just right. So he said he used to have plants rotting on him, and it's a thing of the past, except for a few more difficult plants. Okay, but look, this is all he list of his plants that he cacti that he grows. He grows mostly cacti, and like just so much better than what he had before. Okay. By the way, some things like things that like calciphiles, are things that like dolomitic, like there's like gypsum, things that like gypsum that grow in gypsum, things that are like something gypsophyloides or whatever. Adding a little gypsum in the soil does help for them. Okay. But anyways, a couple of different ways, a couple of different techniques here. At the Huntington Botanic Gardens, they use a portable nutrient injector. So they have this jug here with fertilizer and the pH adjusted, and then they just siphon it out at a certain proportion. Okay, so you know, Barry, he mixes it all ahead of time and then waters his plants. But sometimes when you're doing high volume, you do something. You have a stock solution that's concentrated, and then with this proportioner, you you pull it in certain little, you know, certain amounts that then makes a large volume of water over time. Okay, so that's a dosatron nutrient injector. That's the best in the that's available out there. You know, use a filter over here. The flow rate goes to the left here. This is a filter to make sure no coarse materials, no grit gets into the dosatron and messes it up. But yeah, the filter there. Anyway, that's a really good device. you can buy a slightly cheaper thing called a mixed right. So second best, I call it, reliable, more affordable. Or you can buy some knockoff on Amazon, like one of my students did. And he actually has to shut the water off every time after he waters because this thing drips. It's not watertight, okay? But it only cost him like $150 on Amazon. So, but he had to do a workaround so it doesn't leak on him. But here's what he does. So this is Gianluca, a student here in Davis, and he's also a scientist, so he does this pretty technically, okay? And he started off with a pH of 8.5, right? He got the pH down to 5.5 by using a 2% dilution ratio, you know, with his injector, by, you know, in 40 gallons. So that big 55-gallon drum that he has there, he fills it up with 40 gallons of water, and then he's adding his nutrients in there. It keeps, you know, nitrogen sulfate, some Gromor solutions, and phosphoric acid, and that's he's getting his pH right and his nutrients at the right level. And he said within one watering, he saw his pseudolithos and white sloanas and a few other plants that never grew for him. All of a sudden, they started looking like they were growing. All right. And a lot of succulent growers will mention this again, like immediate results with acidification. All right. Because, you know, even if you're fertilizing and you have, you know, alkaline water, the fertilizer might be there, but it can't be absorbed by the plant. And so, you know, getting the pH right is incredibly important so that the plants are happy. Thank you very much. And happy to entertain some questions if there's any out there from the audience. Okay. This talk is available on our website, greenhouse.ucdavis.edu /conservatory resources. It's available there. I think I've updated it recently. So all these slides are there in as a PowerPoint or as a PDF file if you guys are interested in that. Okay, so from our website. I'll take it, and I think if I do this, I think if I escape here, oops, yep. Let's see, previous. I'm trying to get to, yeah, here we go. I can copy it and then now I can put it in the chat. If anybody wants it out there. So.
Well, thank you, Ernesto. That was a wonderful presentation.
You're very welcome. Trying to make sure I
answered a lot of my questions.
Oh, good. All right. I'm trying to get to where I can send the message to everybody here. Right now, I'm only answering to somebody. I'm trying to get to that part. I think right now I just sent it to Alan. Did you guys see that in the chat? Anyways, if there's any questions out there while I'm trying to figure out how to put this into the regular chat, I'm happy to answer. Anyone?
Ernesto?
Yes, sir.
I'm interested. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
I collect rainwater, and I was adding bleach to it to kill the mold and you know, algae. I'm not going to do that anymore, obviously. But I'm curious about aeration of the water. It's in rain barrels, you know, and should I do something to aerate the water before I start using it? I mean, after a while, it probably lost most of its oxygen.
No, because the you know, the porosity of the mix, the mix itself is where the plants get most of their oxygen. You know, the aerating the water, I mean, that's only if you're doing stuff hydroponically that it's helpful. But no, there's no reason. I mean, one of the things, if you bubble air through the water, I think, I forget how, I don't know my chemistry that well. I have to look it up. But I think you will make it a little bit more acidic. I can't remember. if you bubble water, oxygen through the water, it will change the pH a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can't remember, but yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, good. I figured out how to get it here to everyone. So I'm putting the link to my talk right there. If anybody would like that out there. Yeah. Any other questions out there? There were a few questions early on that came up pertaining to other stuff. So I'm happy to try to answer those as well if there aren't any questions that specifically deal with the talk. If we have a little bit more time, but Kathy, you can let me know how much time we've got.
There was a question. I'm sorry, I was distracted here. Did you answer the question about how to visit UC Davis?
Oh, well, so the easiest time to visit is on the weekends because there's parking issues. You have to pay for parking on campus. Right now, our indoor facilities, like the conservatory itself, are not really open to the public because we're sort of in a little bit of a regulated lockdown. So there is something that people can do to take what's called a symptom survey at UC Davis if they want to like visit indoor facilities, but we're kind of discouraging right now because we're trying to just be safe so that we decrease the chance of students getting infected. But otherwise, during the week, 9 to 5 is when we take in visitors at the conservatory. We're there, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. during the week. We're not typically open on the weekends. Very few weekends out of the year are we open. Once things clear up a little bit more, we're hoping to have a big plant sale again at the conservatory, and so that'll probably be on a weekend. We'll do something like that. But the Arboretum and our outdoor areas are open 24/7 to visit because they're outside. So and for those things, weekends are a really great time to visit because parking is free on campus on Saturday and Sunday.
Do you have I don't know if you have this or not, or if you might consider it, but is there a virtual tour of the greenhouse?
No, there isn't. There isn't one online. I suppose I could put together something like that sometime here soon. Just make a, Ernesto rambling through the conservatory. Yeah.
Since it's closed to the public, that might be a nice thing to do.
Yeah. I'll look into doing that and then and post that to YouTube or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, excellent. Any other questions for Ernesto?
Is it better if you're going to start the acidification? Is it better to wait till it's closer to the growing season if it's going to stimulate the plants?
That's a really good question. Probably, but it wouldn't hurt to give it, if you're watering them now, when they're not growing too much, it wouldn't hurt to make the roots happier. Yeah. Yeah, because even during the off season, roots are they're still sort of staying alive and they're going to be much happier with the right pH. So I think you'll get more out of it when the plants start growing a lot more, but they technically are growing a little bit even during if they have leaves on them during the off season. So, but yeah, you'll get more bang for your effort during the active growing season.
Thank you. I've also been ordering plants from Living Stones down in Tucson. And
great.
one of the things on their website, and really nice plants, by the way. And they mentioned that with the lithops, even then they give a very slight misting, like you're just blowing the dust off the plants, even when they're splitting, which I rarely hear that. But that's just got to keep those hair roots alive, I guess.
Yeah, and yes, and they're in a place where the humidity is really dry most of the year.
Yeah.
So they can get away with doing a little bit of that. We in Northern California probably don't need that as much during our winters, where there's enough ambient humidity that this time of year there's condensation most evenings, right? So for your lithops, you know, they're getting enough there. But they're where it's so dry most of the time.
That's
Yeah.
a good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And Ernesto, can you be sure and let us know when there will be a plant sale?
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to put that out there. Yeah, we're gonna try to have a big succulent plant sale, like succulent focused plant sale, in the near future. So we'll put the word out there to the succulent clubs.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Tanya, you had a question about echeveria, and you know yeah, it doesn't hurt to pull off the leaves that are dying, and if they're starting to rot, just to decrease the likelihood of the rot moving into the rest of the plant. Popping those old leaves off, it won't hurt. You know, when I used to work for my father, I always wondered why I should bother removing older leaves on plants, or older plant parts. And it turns out that when you remove dead, dying plant tissue, whatever's left gets more hormones from the roots, and a hormone called cytokinin, and actually can promote more growth if you remove old stuff to trigger an imbalance and cause growth in the plant. So
Good to know. My concern was,
Yeah.
was I creating an open wound that would have all that rot and get in there easier?
yeah, and so, you know, doing that when the weather is dry, when you're not going to water right afterwards, you know, those wounds will only be a problem if they're put in a situation where they'll get infected easily, you know. And so when it's like, whenever I prune or trim plants, especially succulents, I always do it when the air is going to be really dry and there's not going to be rain forecast for a few days, so that the wounds can heal.
So after the freeze we just had, I should probably let them sit a while before I pull them off. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got it. Any other? Oh, I'm sorry. I'll stop sharing my screen in case everybody wants to see themselves more easily. There we are. All right. And let's see. I think I saw a question from: can winter growers, Haworthia, Kalanchoe, etc., be fertilized in winter when growing in heated greenhouse? You know, I've had this discussion with people. Most Haworthias, I believe, are summer growers, and so I cut back on watering them in the winter time considerably. I do that thing kind of like we were talking about with the lithops, where I just splash a little bit of water on them in the winter time so they don't go completely bone dry in a warm heated greenhouse. If I was in a situation where I didn't have heat, or you know, something, you know, if it was an ambient greenhouse where it stayed cool and moist, I would cut back on the watering considerably for Haworthias in the winter time. But and for me, because we have our greenhouses are pretty warm, I splash a little bit of water on them throughout the year. Yeah. Anything else out there? Alrighty, well, I think I'm going to get going so I can help my wife with keeping our sane with our children. Okay.
How are they doing?
Oh, really great, really great. I'm trying to. They're learning scientific names already, so yeah.
I expect nothing less.
I'm trying, but yeah, they're a lot of fun. They
They're
take
very-
away time from working on succulents as much, but yeah.
I see them on Facebook. They're very cute.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ernesto. Wonderful presentation, and have a good rest of the day.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was very good.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else from anybody? Anything spectacular you want to share before we sign off? All right. Well, then I guess stay tuned for what's coming up in February, and good to see you all. And if you Remember to sign up for membership if you haven't already, so that you can continue receiving the courier. So that's about it, I guess. All right, so have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Kathy, I saw that sign up and it's a dead screen. You know, you said sign up before the end of December.